Hi everyone, looks like we are live for another of our weekly recaps with the Defiant print team. So I'm Cami Russo, I'm the founder of the Defiant, and we are here with YYC Trader, our head of news. YYC, I forgot to tell you about the last stream. You had a lot of fans just clamoring for you in the chat section, so they'll be glad to see you back this week. We have Owen and Alex, our staff reporters, and we have Ed, our editor. So yeah, let's get started. This week, again, it just kept getting uglier and uglier for the FTX saga. So we'll break down the main twists and turns of the story. Probably the main, kind of the biggest news that happened this week that we got the first filing from John Ray. That's the bankruptcy expert that's handling the case. He said he's never seen this level of negligence in his career. And that's saying a lot because he was involved with the Enron failure. We'll go through how this collapse is spreading, with the kind of all the dominoes that have fallen this week. And next, we'll talk about whether DeFi has actually come out as a winner or not. It's not as clear cut as you might think. And we also have a few, not too many, but we have a few non-FTX related news. So I think it's important to remember there are other things happening outside of this. So I'll let Alex take it away with the latest story.
Yeah, so we finally got our first court filings, like you said, and what was interesting is that we were waiting for the first day filing, which in a bankruptcy case is the explanation of how things got to where they are and why this firm is filing for bankruptcy, and that normally comes shortly after filing. The fact that it took like almost an entire week for this to drop says a lot about the mess that Sam Bankman-Fried had left behind, and the new CEO, John Ray, who had helped lead the bankruptcy for Enron. He didn't pull any punches in this filing. It is 40 years of turning bankrupt companies around. He has never seen a mess like this. There was no semblance of an HR department. Employees were essentially paid by like DMing their bosses, who would respond with like emojis, like a smiley face, I guess, like, yeah, sure, we'll pay you. There was no list of like bank accounts that FTX had and like where its money was. He's put together just like an all-star team, John Ray has, of bankruptcy experts who are essentially trying to figure out what assets FTX has and where they are. And as of the first day filing, he still doesn't know. It's a mess.
I heard that someone just interject. I heard someone like sent. I think they owed FTX money. They did like an OTC trade, and then FTX paid them, and then it took like 2 days, and then they had to voluntarily pay FTX back. So just building on the degree of disorganization.
Yeah, I think Alex, as your story captured, Ray was shocked at the ad hoc nature of management at FTX. And that's not even really touching on the symbiosis with Alameda Research and all of the potential for self-dealing, which is ultimately what sank the whole enterprise, at least in the market. But yeah, Ray, I don't think I've ever seen a bankruptcy filing where there's that much emotion coming through the officer who's been put in charge of managing the workout. The shock was coming through the language in his filing, as you noted in your story, and it just kind of confirmed all of our suspicions about just, there was no order whatsoever to this company.
Yeah. So one second, just before we move on to the exact quote that he has here in the filing, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Goldfinch. They're an awesome DeFi protocol, so check them out, and we'll come back to them later. But here's the filing, and page 2. So he gets right to it. He says, "Never in my career have I seen such a complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information as occurred here. From compromised systems integrity and faulty regulatory oversight abroad to the concentration of control in the hands of a very small group of inexperienced, unsophisticated, and potentially compromised individuals. This situation is unprecedented." It's just, yes, a lot of kind of emotion. He definitely held no punches, and speaking about just the level of concentration of power that we've already seen kind of has been talked about and leaked in different interviews and investigations of how FTX was run by this, Sam Bankman-Fried and a very small group of insiders, basically. The other, and speaking of that, and that, I mean, what really caught my attention was this $1 billion loan to Sam himself. So, I mean, FTX it was Alameda, the one who lent Sam directly, personally, $1 billion, just casually, taking $1 billion from his company, and then a couple of other high-level executives also took out hundreds of millions of dollars in loans from Alameda. So,
and this came in financial documents that FTX and Alameda did have, but these are unaudited financial statements. This was as of September 30th this year. And John Ray goes out of his way to say in the filing, he does not trust any of these numbers. He even has, for certain segments of the FTX empire, he does have audited statements. He does not trust those either, which is really saying something. I mean, and not only that, but there were FTX was buying property and other personal goods for some of its employees, which were not listed as loans in their financial record keeping. I mean, it's like the entire filing is really damning. Legal experts who looked over it, pointed out that it's not usual for the person who takes over a company to note in this kind of filing, he went out of his way to really paint a picture of the mess that existed behind the scenes.
Yeah, and I think the other story that I think was really interesting this week was this interview with Vox, that it was basically just a 1 hour, I think, Twitter DM session between the reporter and the SBF. And what I got from it was that Sam was just really not very remorseful. I mean, he said he screwed up, but then when he was asked, if what would you do differently, he didn't say, "Oh, I wouldn't take customer funds." He said, I wouldn't have filed for bankruptcy. So that's the one thing he regrets. And then, the other piece of it was just he comes off as this extremely cynical person, where he said that acting ethically, with this whole effective altruism. That was basically just, I mean, this is how I read it. Tell me, guys, what you think. But it basically, he was saying that it was just like a PR stunt. I don't know what you guys thought about this story.
Yeah. I mean, he was like, yeah, it was mostly PR, and yeah, super cynical. Like his belief is basically like, am I a good person? Am I a bad person? Like it's all about whether you win or lose, right? Like, do you get caught, basically? Do you have the bigger balance sheet? And he's speaking about the court of public opinion, whether people generally think you're good or bad. That's how it works. I don't that's a really cynical way of looking at things. I don't think most people would.
But it
would
is
agree.
striking to see the target of a federal criminal investigation just speaking freely on Twitter without his lawyer there. I mean, it is. If you needed any more evidence at all about how sloppy the management practices were at FTX/Alameda, you only need look at that DM conversation with Vox. I mean, this is a guy who's erratic. He's just saying whatever comes to the top of his head. It's cynical, as Alex pointed out, and I think it just makes him more vulnerable, and actually the company itself far more vulnerable to litigation, because what he's providing is a view to his motivations. He's suggesting a kind of deception that, oh yeah, I was out there and I was doing all this PR stuff, but that was all just kabuki. That was all just a facade. What I was really after was money, and so forth. I mean, in the hands of a lawyer who's suing you or prosecuting you, that can be really damaging. So and let's not forget that SBF's parents, both of them, are Stanford law professors. They must be just like pulling out their hair right now, going like, what is this kid doing? Somebody shut him up.
Yeah. And I mean, building on that, I mean, Autism Capital did a whole investigation about, use of stimulants, frankly. So I think also he might not, I think there are drugs involved.
I would be very careful with that. I mean, first, Tell us, Owen, what is Autism Capital?
Autism Capital is an anonymous Twitter account with hundreds of thousands of followers. What that's worth, I'm reluctant to articulate.
But it's become this kind of symbol of quote unquote citizen journalism on Twitter, which has suddenly become this really interesting sideshow,
right,
to the FTX story, right?
Right. And I'm reading the background from Milky Eggs, which is a blog that put out a pretty good summation of some of what went down with Alameda, and they touch on the use of stimulants and.
Well, at a minimum, okay, I would just stop you there. But at a minimum, I think what all of this stuff that's out there says is that FTX has become a target of a lot of rumor mongering and suspicion, and yet, as Alex covered in his stories, when these filings hit the tape, it's like, wow, it's as bad as we thought.
Fair enough. Cam, you're muted.
Sorry, guys. I think the other thing in to find out in this story is that he also said that how he was lobbying in Washington. That was also PR. So he was obviously doing exactly what he was telling regulators was the big risk in crypto. Then I think, speaking of the media's role in this whole thing and how these Twitter, like very big Twitter accounts, have really taken a hold of the story, with Autism Capital, I think probably the main one. There's also this Mario. How do you pronounce his last name? Do you guys know Mario Nawfal?
Nafwal?
Nawfal. with his spaces that have gotten like really high profile. A lot of news is just breaking on Twitter, which contrasts very starkly, I think, um, with coverage from mainstream media, which, obviously, we've seen some great stories come out of Reuters. They have a really great, step by step on what happened. So it's not, all mainstream coverage hasn't been bad. I mean, far from it. But there have been some standout pieces that have really just missed the mark badly, I think, in my opinion. So it just seems like, we have this New York Times piece that's, I think, was received very badly in crypto, because it just, it was a very soft piece where he's like, oh yeah, I'm sleeping well, thank you. He just like is able to explain himself, with the journalist not really pressing him on key issues. Today there's this just outrageous story on Caroline, the FTX CEO, and it's like
Alameda CEO.
Alameda CEO, yes. You can't call someone who's being accused of massive fraud risk loving, and kind of highlighting her love of Harry Potter. It's like, it's so odd. It's so weird. And then this Washington Post piece saying, just highlighting Sam's efforts in the pandemic. So it's like, for some reason, you see all this negative coverage about crypto from these outlets, but then it's like, okay, like, now's your chance to really put out, like, criticize and come out after this guy, but you give like all these like softball pieces and positive coverage, so it comes out as very strange. And
And
again, like, I want to highlight, not all mainstream media has bad coverage, but there have been like a few of these pieces where you're just left like scratching your head. What did you guys think?
I think it's the fact that these publications otherwise will often go out of their way, not just crypto, but like tech more generally, kind of framing stories in the harshest possible light that like really draws attention to the way they've written about this, right?
Yeah.
Like I probably wouldn't have thought twice about some of these stories if not for the fact that you come to expect a certain tone from, say, the New York Times when it comes to crypto or tech. The SBF story. I mean, there was some really good reporting in there. There was some useful information. They confirmed reporting that had been done by Reuters and the Wall Street Journal earlier about some of the shenanigans that had gone on behind the scenes at FTX, but which is great, but the framing of the story and the way that they kind of just have SBF, who props to them for getting this interview, but the way he kind of just gets to talk, like you said, about how well he's sleeping, without really pushing him on having potentially stolen money was it's like, really?
Yeah.
Actually, I didn't have a problem with that story. I guess I'm one of the few who, I think the tone was ironic, and I think you have to understand the New York Times, Washington Post,
Fair.
when they report a story like this, which is kind of a narrative of here's how this all went down. And remember, they're speaking to non-crypto people. They're speaking to just mainstream readers who might not even know the difference between CFI or DeFi or things like that. Then they're going to be very careful in not packing judgment or opinion into the stories. They're going to defer. They're going to err on the side of just letting the information and the facts speak for themselves. And sure, there's a kind of positioning, and given all the anger out there, you want every story you read, you want to see, some really hard, tough questions, and even, judgment being meted out. But I didn't understand the outrage on Twitter to this
So,
story. I
so
thought it laid
that
out the
was
facts pretty well. I mean, there were a few other pieces that maybe took a little stronger tone, but I thought it was fine.
I think there were like key facts missing, like they never talk about the 8 billion that was lent out to Alameda. And
They probably
like,
didn't independently report or independently corroborate it.
I
but
think they may have.
yeah.
I mean,
I'm
I don't
sorry, go ahead.
want to speak for New York Times editors, but I think we're kind of losing sight of the really interesting thing that came out of this week. And again, getting back to Owen and his raising of Autism Capital and what's happening with Twitter and all of it. We saw a number of documents being produced and thrown on Twitter. Like, remember, like over last weekend, there was, documents, internal documents saying, here's what's happening. This is a source speaking from FTX, and I'll vouch for the credibility of the source. I know who this person is. And that's really interesting because it immediately begins to color the narrative that's coming out at the beginning of the week. And every reporter, mainstream and otherwise, is reading all of this stuff and trying to parse what's reportable, what's newsworthy, what should we not report. And I think it's really ironic that Twitter, in terms of breaking and pushing a really important finance story, is doing it in the very week that Elon Musk is completely dismantling the infrastructure for Twitter. I mean, this time next week, what does Twitter look like? We don't even know. We can't even answer that question.
I don't know if you guys were on Twitter last night, but
yeah, I mean, I think what Twitter has done on this story over the last week has been really fascinating. It might even be kind of an inflection point, like it's just fascinating.
It's like crowdsourced journalism. I think actually, I think we can say that, this whole FTX story has really highlighted the importance of journalists in general.
Absolutely.
Like, I wouldn't say it's Twitter versus mainstream or like crypto media. I think, everyone has played a part in giving more information to the public. Like, of course, like, we need to point out that CoinDesk was the one who broke this story in the first place. Like, it was their story that just, was kind of the what kicked everything in motion. Saying that, a lot of the balance sheet of, was it FTX or Alameda?
Alameda's balance sheet.
Alameda's
40%.
balance sheet was 40% on FTT, on the token, on FTX's token. And that set everything in motion. So it was CoinDesk, a crypto publication, the one who broke this story. Then, Twitter jumped on it. Then, then the Washington Post also broke news on this. Not the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal broke news on this as well. So, I think every type of outlet has played a part.
Yeah, and I would just give a shout out to our team, especially to Owen, in reporting a really important element of the story, which I know you want to talk about, Cami, which is DeFi versus CeFi. And the fact that this whole thing was triggered by an internal document that CoinDesk got a hold of from a source. We don't know who the source is. They haven't disclosed that. But that they got an internal document which revealed something that we didn't know before. And as soon as that information went public, it just created a bank run and the whole thing unraveled. That violates so many values that are supposed to be at the heart of not just DeFi, but crypto writ large. And that to me was a very interesting dimension of the story unfolding last week.
Yeah, we'll get into DeFi versus CeFi and what's kind of the impact been there. We'll also talk about the Contagion next. But let's take a minute to talk about our sponsor, Goldfinch. So we have a short segment here where they explain what they do and how you can take advantage of the protocol. Goldfinch is a decentralized credit protocol with a mission to connect the world's capital to the world's growth, with yield from real-world lending and loans collateralized by real-world assets. The protocol has announced Goldfinch membership, empowering Goldfinch investors and aligning the protocol's participants with the network's long-term success. Upgrade your participation for enhanced yields from member rewards and own the new global credit paradigm. Sign up for the waitlist today at goldfinch.finance/membership. All right. So let's talk about the fallout. We already started to see the first dominoes to fall last week, as recently as last week with I think the BlockFi was one of the major ones to halt withdrawals last week. But this week we've seen other further ways that the ecosystem is being impacted. YYC, maybe you can guide us through who kind of these players are.
Sure. Before we get to that, I thought I'd just mention that it's ironic that CoinDesk broke the story, but they didn't give a heads up to DCG, who owns them, so they could have saved Genesis $1 billion.
Well, good for CoinDesk. Yeah, right? I mean, that shows they have integrity. So
exactly.
Yeah. And another thing is that, the Bahamas, basically, the regulator came out yesterday and said that they ordered SBF and company to withdraw assets from FTX, right? So essentially, they directed the hack, is what a story from Crypto Briefing is alleging, because in another filing yesterday, FTX, or rather John Ray and the people in charge of FTX now, are basically contesting the assets. It's turned into a food fight, basically. And I mean, it's crazy how in the Vox interview in the DMs, he clearly said that it was a hack and it was malware on an employee's laptop or something. And now apparently the Bahamian government ordered it. I mean, it's all so shady and fishy. And it's like, it's just.
But has anybody confirmed that?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just asking, has anybody confirmed that the Bahamian government is the one that has that 400 million in crypto?
According to this filing, which I haven't gone through completely, but it seems like it, yeah. Because they've actually quoted SBF's DMs in the court filing, the ones from Vox.
So the court filing says that even though SBF said it was a hack, it was them who ordered the funds to be transferred?
Yeah, apparently the Bahamas regulator ordered Mr. Bankman-Fried and Mr. Wang instructed that certain post-petition transfers of debtor assets be made after the case was filed. And apparently, the liquidator appointed in the Bahamas filed a new bankruptcy case in New York, whereas everything else is going on in Delaware, right? So and who knows what's going on? I mean,
yeah,
we can speculate as to how things move in these jurisdictions. I mean, money could have changed hands. I mean, anything could happen.
All of that stuff is normal. That's all normal, procedural. In any big bankruptcy, there's always going to be arguments over which court do we want to argue in. There's a lot of venue shopping that goes on legally. That's all normal.
All right. So coming to the Contagion, I mean, almost everyone got wrecked because of the sheer profile that SBF kind of cultivated, right? Rubbing shoulders with Congress and, celebrities, etc. So almost everyone fell for, the hype. So we had Galois Capital, who lost half their fund, almost $100 million in assets that were trapped on FTX and unable to be withdrawn. Ikigai Asset Management also, which is a fund that raised 30 million back in May. It says it has a large majority of its assets on FTX. So we don't know yet or rather, even they don't know yet whether they're going to continue operations or wind down. But yeah, a significant hit. And I mean, the biggest one seems to be Multicoin, that had 10% of its fund or AUM on FTX. So that was a big hit. And I mean, it's been a rough year for Multicoin, right? Solana, like they basically came to prominence because of being early to Solana, but it seems like they didn't, take profits on any of it. So they 200x and round tripped it just like the rest of us. And so, according to someone who attended the LP call that they had a couple of days ago, of course, we can't verify this, so take it with a grain of salt. The fund's down 55% this month alone. So that is, I mean, for a fund that big, that's huge, right? And it goes on to say that 10% of the AUM was on FTX, as the company said, but where did the other 45% loss come from? And I mean, most obviously it would come from a lot of Solana, because Solana has been battered this month. And I mean, other ecosystem tokens as well. I mean, if we think about it rationally, they would have their best assets most likely on the exchange, right? The most liquid assets that are in demand. So what's left then? Is it just locked up VC allocations of random shitcoins? I mean, who knows, right? So we'll have to wait and see what the next report looks like.
Yeah, I mean, Gala Capital, Ikigai, Multicoin, CoinShares also said they had exposure. I'm sure we'll see more. It's just, such a huge exchange and hedge fund to fall that it does have this contagion and like systemic risk to crypto, unfortunately. Ed, I mean, and FTX and Alameda were so huge because, in part, because they just received hundreds of millions in funding.
2 billion.
2 billion. They got to a 32 billion valuation in their last round. So what's going on with those VCs who bet so?
They've taken out an eraser, and they've just erased the 231 million, the 150 million valuation, and they put a zero right there, and then they've sent that letter to their investors. Now, I mean, it's VC stuff, but you're talking Sequoia, you're talking Tiger Global, Temasek, which is Singapore's sovereign wealth fund. You're talking the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund, NEA, which is another big Sand Hill Road, Paradigm, Owen's good friends. That's another one, and they're all just marking to zero. And yeah, I mean, no one ever wants to lose money, especially when it's 9 digits. But I mean, Sequoia has 7 billion in invested capital, and they just wrote off like 200 million. So in the big scheme of things, for an outfit like Sequoia, this is a rounding error. Still, it's very embarrassing. And in the case of Sequoia, it's especially embarrassing because Sequoia has been doing a lot of content marketing to support SBF. There was this notorious article, I know, Cami, that you saw it. I think it was 13,000 words, like this huge piece of content marketing they did about SBF's altruism and why everybody should be like him. I mean, that was published in September. And, they kind of sent that around. So I think for them, it's actually the embarrassment of not having done the due diligence and not having insisted that FTX have a proper board of directors. I mean, Alex, you'll know if this is right, but I think there was only 2 directors and no independents on the board at FTX. And for a VC,
well, there was no board.
Yeah, I mean, for all intents and purposes, there was no board. And so for these big institutional investors to be deploying 9-figure investments on behalf of their clients into a firm where there's no management practices or due diligence whatsoever is shocking. It's shocking. And I think the fallout for institutional investors in crypto is going to be a significant theme over the next couple of quarters.
Just to add here that, most of this due diligence and these deals happened in 2021 during the bull market when times were good, right? So it's
Indeed.
very likely that, they passed due diligence and they did like obviously not deep enough, like going and embedding themselves with the team probably and seeing like how they operated. But most of the problems happened after Terra collapsed, right? That's when
Yeah.
Alameda dug itself into a hole and had to like scramble to do all this stuff. So that happened this year after these investments were made and the deals were done. So I think it's, unfair to like completely blame the VCs as well. I mean, they should have been
I
doing
don't think so.
ongoing due
I
diligence,
don't.
obviously.
I don't
but
think it's unfair.
yeah.
They're.
Yeah.
I mean, these are sophisticated organizations. The fact that you wouldn't even insist that an outfit that's inventing its own tokens doesn't even have a board or produce a regular audit report, that's malpractice.
Yeah, I mean,
and bull market isn't an excuse for that.
Yeah, we've seen like a lot of VC soul searching after the FTX collapse, and a lot, like many investors have like come out of the woodwork saying, okay, we looked at this deal and here's why we passed. So there were red flags that some saw and others ignored. So I forget
you can't underestimate the power of FOMO too in Silicon Valley or Wall Street. It's like Sequoia's watching A16Z back this and this and this and this and this, and they're like, what are we going to do in crypto? Well, we can get into the Series C round of FTX. Write the check.
Yeah, I mean, there's a tweet from Suzu, right, back from 2019, even before FTX like launched, and they were just doing their fundraising round where like he kind of flagged it. Obviously, right now he's like persona non grata, but back then he was a great follower. I think until he got too rich and it got to his head, like he used to actually share a lot of useful information.
Yeah, I think it was Alex from Hack VC. Let me just check. But there was this one VC that shared why he passed, and he said, I looked at the balance sheet. I saw there was 100 million loss that was unaccounted for. That Sam kind of like, didn't really explain where it came from, and a few other kind of, things like that just like didn't make sense. Yeah, it was Alexander Pack from Hack VC who said that. So I mean, there were red flags. I mean, still like, I think it's also a bit kind of like patting, like a lot of VCs are just like patting themselves on the back right now, the ones who passed, when it's normal that
totally,
like you're fundraising and most VCs will pass on the deal, like so I think like right now, like those who just like happen to pass are being like a little bit disingenuous, like, okay, yeah, we passed because we're such geniuses, but
I think
really
next time they're trying to raise money for a fund, they're going to be like, and we were the firm that didn't invest in FTX.
Exactly.
Yeah, they need to open up their balance sheet. I'm sure they got rugged somewhere else.
Yes, yeah. So I don't know. It's
But props. I saw Olaf of Polychain also passed, and and he said, I think maybe something we haven't touched on. I read about it in the Nansen report yesterday. Is that a lot of, the low float of FTT made. I think he was sketched out by that because, from my understanding, YYC, you probably have a better grasp on this, but that means you can push the price of FTT around quite a bit, quite easily, while it also has a very large market cap, and that just allowed them to get a lot of leverage. So I know that Alameda was playing that game, and Olaf was kind of calling them out for that.
Oh, this was the Solana playbook. Like that's why they were called Sam coins, right? So basically what they would do is they would create, like, let's say a token has like 100 million tokens total supply, right? So they would only release like 500K or a million to the public, right? And obviously like people will FOMO in and drive the price up. So what does that mean in terms of fully diluted valuation, right? So your 500K tokens are trading at, let's say, $10 a pop, right? So that gives you what, 500K, 5 million. So that gives you a 500 million fully diluted valuation. And who holds all the locked tokens? It's Alameda and Company and SBF.
Right.
And so essentially they use these as collateral to borrow like hard assets.
Yeah. And they can even drive the price. Like they can even drive the price. I mean, they have enough power to, I mean, as a market maker, I think they can also, I'm not 100% sure, but you can also, you can have a lot of influence on the price as well.
I mean, they control the market maker that had all the tokens and the exchange that listed all the tokens.
Yeah.
So
it's a good deal.
I mean, it's not like other exchanges don't do this. It just wasn't as blatant, like during the BSC craze. I mean, everyone's forgotten about that now. But during that time, Binance used to list every shitcoin under the sun because I'm sure like volumes, listing fees, all that stuff, it's bull market and people take advantage. But yeah, this was like blatant violation of like how it should be, in terms of the relationships between market maker and exchange.
And speaking of Solana, another kind of big casualty of this scandal has been, Solana itself, the chain and all the projects building on it. Owen, do you want to go through the story?
I mean, the data points, and our writer Tarang wrote this story, but Solana's TVL is down almost 70%. It's at 303 million. Its token is down 25% compared to 7% with Ether. And so obviously not looking good. And Solana was deeply, I don't remember if it was FTX or Alameda which invested in one of Solana's rounds, but a lot of Solana's projects were very closely tied. I think Alameda invested in like at least 7 projects launching on Solana. So
yeah, we have here that Alameda invested in 9 Solana projects.
Right.
So they were like heavily intertwined, and now Solana's taking the hit because of that. And other players in crypto that have been hit are both CeFi and DeFi lenders. So Alex, you wrote the story on Genesis. Can you briefly go through what's happening here, and then I'll really want to get into what the impact in DeFi has been.
Sure. Well, just to go chronologically, I mean, Genesis was having some issues this week, but before that, BlockFi, another crypto lender, also halted withdrawals. BlockFi is interesting because they had trouble this summer after the fallout from the collapse of the hedge fund 3 Arrows Capital, and FTX swooped in to rescue them. So now that FTX is going under, BlockFi is kind of getting thrust back into this like situation where last week it had to halt withdrawals. Next in line, the next domino is Genesis. Genesis this week announced that it was halting withdrawals. They didn't have enough money on hand to honor customers who wanted to pull out. And the knock-on effect from Genesis now, I mean, maybe minor in the grand scheme of things, given everything else that's happened in the scene, but Gemini, crypto exchange, just like FTX, albeit one that obviously hasn't had the issues that FTX has had, but Gemini had an earn program that allowed you to essentially deposit your crypto assets and then get like a nice yield on them, and that was done through Genesis. So with Genesis, and to be specific, Genesis lending arm is the one that's having this issue. It's like spot trading platform is so far unaffected, but with Genesis lending halting withdrawals, Gemini Earn had to essentially pause its operations. And so it's like, each time somebody goes under, everything is kind of just connected such that, you look around and you're like, okay, well, who's next?
So, and then this other CeFi lender is also, in trouble. I think this happened last week, but related to Genesis. BlockFi halted withdrawals, and this, remember that they had been bailed out by SBF earlier this year. So they got this lending facility, and they had an agreement for Alameda to buy them out. So, now that that's obviously not happening, and that this loan that they required, I don't think Alameda is making good on it anytime soon. So BlockFi was also hit by this. So now, okay, we've talked about all the players that have been impacted by this collapse. We talked about the different hedge funds and VCs, the CeFi lenders. We didn't talk about the DeFi lenders. Owen had this really good story on unsecured DeFi lenders also being somewhat affected. It's not a huge amount. Owen, how much was it that was on the line?
I think we saw it was about 13 million, or almost 13 million.
Right. So it's a small amount, but still, keep in mind that these are really, still small players within DeFi. They have about 180 million in TVL. So 13 million is about, roughly under 10% of TVL. So still, still not nothing of loans on the line for these unsecured lenders. So that's another aspect that's being impacted because of the FTX fallout. And the question is, who is there a winner in all of this? And I think it's very, very tempting for us at the Defiant, and for others who are advocate or are bullish or believe in a more decentralized financial system, to say that DeFi is the winner in all of this. I think it's somewhat true, but not entirely true. So, and I think numbers show that. So we'll go through the coverage we've done, but essentially, on the one hand, it's true that DeFi has kept working as it should. DEXs continue trading. No DeFi lender has halted withdrawals. Everyone, DeFi users can continue to see all transactions transparently on chain, and that's a really that just highlights how this system just works. It's better. You don't have to rely on third parties to custody your funds. You don't have to trust any third party, and we've seen how badly that can play out with FTX. But at the same time, I think it's a little bit of a strawman argument, because it's not like all the millions of users in CeFi can just today go and start using DeFi. Scalability is not there. The UX is not there. There's DeFi still in this kind of regulatory gray area. So unfortunately, while DeFi is undoubtedly a better financial system, it's not ready for mainstream. And what happens is that it just on-chain flows point to the fact that, okay, people are just leaving. They're not coming to DeFi. People who are disillusioned with CeFi are just leaving crypto. And Owen, you've been writing about this theme, so maybe you can elaborate.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, I talked to some of the people at Nansen. Also, shout out Pob for this great image, one of my favorites.
This one.
Yeah. Thought that was cute. So yeah, I talked to the people at Nansen, and they shared some documents with us showing double-digit increases in addresses on the DeFi protocols, which seemed to indicate that people are using DeFi more. So that seemed like a bullish signal for DeFi. And we also saw Ether going off mostly centralized exchanges, with the potential explanation being that the whole idea of custodying your own assets, people took priority because they were worried generally that their assets would be taken off exchanges. So they were taking them into their wallets. Conversely, DeFi Llama just put out an image showing that the balance of stable coins didn't go down as much as the balance as TVL balances in DeFi of stable coins, with the implication being that people maybe are also taking their stable coins out of DeFi protocols. So it's been kind of a mixed bag. And Alex wrote a story as well about there's also been a spike of DEX volume, which I believe Chainalysis pinned on an MEV bot. So it's very hard to tell. And like Cami said, I think people who are deep in DeFi are very excited to push this new financial system and show that it's worked as intended and is very transparent. But we're seeing a mixed signals right now. And I think it's really interesting. I mean, I'm working on a story on stablecoins today of how people are going to see DeFi and because there was the initial push of like custody your own assets. And then now it's like, okay, proof is in the pudding. Like we're calling for that. Is it going to happen? Can you provide value to users generally? And we'll see what happens. I mean, obviously a lot of people are spooked. So that's where I'd say things stand.
Yeah. So, I think the data speaks for itself. Like TVL is down. I think like over 10% since this scandal broke. And while users and DEX volumes are up, that I think that's a reflection of just the turmoil that's happening in the market. So people who are in DeFi are trading more, are using DEXs, but we are seeing net outflows from decentralized finance. So and from CeFi. So there was this Chainalysis report that showed that there was like around like 5% drop in Bitcoin and ETH holdings in the past couple of weeks, and that money is not going to DeFi. It's just leaving crypto. Like people are just cashing out. So I think that's, if we can conclude, and we've been talking about the fallout and what the impact has been. I think that shows you the bigger picture, that the biggest impact has been on trust, on crypto's credibility. That has taken a huge hit, and who knows how long it'll take to recover that.
But
Yeah, I'd like to direct viewers to an opinion. We published a really nice opinion column today. It's on our website if you look under the opinion tab, but it's by Amit Chowdhury, who is the head of DeFi research at Polygon. And he wrote a really nice piece, which we called a recipe for making DeFi lending sustainable and stable. And this wasn't an FTX story. Amit was looking at this above and beyond whatever FTX fallout. But he zeroed in on over-collateralization and by extension, the complexity that permeates DeFi and how that's really hindering mass market adoption when it comes to decentralized finance and fueling market inefficiencies. And it's a just really thoughtful story on how DeFi needs to shed a lot of this complexity and demonstrate true utility to users, and that if it can do that, so much good things will come as a result of that. So I just wanted to give Amit a shout out and just let viewers check out our website and check out this opinion story, because it's one of the most thoughtful things I've seen written on the challenges that DeFi is facing right now.
Awesome. And we are running out of time, and we didn't even get to touch on all the other non-FTX stories. I'll just, rush through them very quickly. But there was finally an audit on Terra and how they used 3.4 billion to defend the UST peg. Maker had this release on DAI transfers, super rare auctioned NFT passes for more than 4 million, which remarkable given the market environment that we're in. We had our podcast. Some good news. Like, let's not forget that there are good news happening. JP Morgan had its first DeFi trade, and we go behind the scenes with the JP Morgan's blockchain lead. So check all those stories out too. It's not all FTX. And remember to subscribe to our newsletter, where we publish every day the latest in DeFi. Subscribe to this channel, and yeah, follow us on Twitter. We'll be keeping you posted on all the latest news and analysis with a DeFi bent and no shill coverage. So thanks everyone for joining us, and yeah, see you all next week.
See you guys
Later.